Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any organization. Let's go to the podcast. Reinhard Koenig, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks,
Welcome
Paul.
to the Courage
It's
Never
great
Quits
to be here with
podcast,
you
where
today.
members of the
And
West
thanks
Point
for
class
what
of
you're doing for
1986
the
tell their
class and
stories.
really for all of
I'm your
us,
host,
in
Paul
our future.
LaFontaine.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
As always, the views expressed in this podcast are
we
those
were
of
in
the
4th
participants and
Regiment
not of
together.
West Point, the Army, or any
I figured
organization.
that out from one of your
Let's go to the
previous
podcast.
podcasts. Yeah.
Right. I have like snapshot memories of you as plebes we were running around. You have those all the plebes in the same regiment. You kind of have snapshot memories of each other. We were 18 years old and a little bit stressed.
A little bit, periodically.
But Etna, California. Now you're a California cadet like myself. Talk about Etna. That's way up north. I consider myself from Northern California, but man, I'm way south compared to you. You were up there quite a ways.
So obviously, so Etna got put in the howitzer because when I actually entered West Point, I'd been at Oregon State for a year. My parents had moved to the town of Etna, so that was more like my mailing address, which was pretty close to where I was. So truth be told here, I graduated from high school in a place called Happy Camp, California. Now, I think you may know there's a pretty distinguished classmate of ours named Dan Hoganson. So he and I graduated from high school together. I think there were 29 of us in the graduating class, and we ended up at West Point
Camp, California, that got two of you out of Happy Camp.
Yeah. Now, truth be told, I always spent my last 2 years at Happy Camp High. Dan was born and raised there, and if you've never been to Happy Camp, which I suppose most people haven't, it's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally, you have to drive 90 miles to the nearest McDonald's in order to fill your Big Mac fantasy or whatever it is. So it really is. It's not quite off the grid and it's not quite off the road system, but it's way out there. But we had a lot of fun there.
That's astonishing. Obviously, you guys knew each other. You were in a very tiny school. What did you talk about it together, or was this an independent thing, or how did it come to be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I got to Happy Camp High at the beginning of my junior year, and Dan and I were really in all the same classes, and we played some sports together and those types of things. And then there were obviously a lot of conversations. So, he's a very patriotic. He came from a very patriotic family. His dad was actually our teacher there in the high school, was our basketball coach. But just a lot of conversations and a lot of things as far as, wanting to serve and wanting to do things bigger than ourselves. That all came up certainly during that time we were there together.
Okay. And then what district was that? How did you get in a nomination, I guess is the question.
Yeah. So that's I don't know how Dan did it. So we both graduated in 1981, and I certainly wasn't ready at that point in time for the challenge of West Point. So my version of prep school was I went off to Oregon State University for a year,
right?
And obviously kind of found myself got some better grades and a little bit better SAT score. Dan went down to a community college in Weed, California called College of the Ciscos. I don't know if he did kind of the same thing, but it just for both of us, I joined ROTC and really enjoyed that. And then just the idea of attending West Point came up, and through all that kind of preparation and really the support from the active duty folks there on the ROTC program at Oregon State, they really supported me and really kind of pushed my nomination through. Now, you asked about, we were in the first district of California. I don't remember ever getting a nomination. I think from a paperwork standpoint, my nomination was because there was a certain number of slots dedicated for people that were in ROTC, and somehow late in the process, I managed to snag one of those along the way. So just kind of, we all have our different paths, but that was mine.
Now that we're elder statesmen, you get to learn a little bit about how the different districts had different competitive applications. So
Sure.
if you're going to come from Northern Virginia, it's very competitive.
Sure.
If you're from other places, less so. But apparently back in 1981, Happy Camp was like brutally competitive.
Oh, brutally, yeah. I mean, yeah, the guy that was third on the list didn't make it. I don't know who that was.
Per capita, you guys had more academy interest than any other district in the country. And then how did going to Oregon State, how did that help you kind of ground yourself? It sounds like just an extra year is always good.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, certainly it's all about maturity in a lot of different ways. I mean, just, learning to study and quite frankly, taking some classes, some tough classes, and, really understanding what it takes to get through college. That was very, very helpful for me. Certainly didn't prepare me for the rigors of West Point, and certainly the military aspects of being at West Point.
You could shine a shoe and fall into a formation, right? You could shine a shoe and fall into a formation, and
what's that now?
You could shine a shoe and fall into a formation.
Yeah, a little bit. For a freshman non-scholarship ROTC person, the demands were not too good. Although I had to be up for class. I think our class was at 7:30 in the morning, which was kind of unheard of in a civilian college.
Right. There you go. So from Oregon State straight in with us on our day then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. Lynn McNames, I think her last name is Johnson now, but she was from the big city of Wairika, which is about 5,000 people, just down 90 miles. They had the McDonald's. But she and Dan and I went to West Point together, and we had this picture of at the Medford Airport in 1982, probably on about June 30th, that our parents, I don't know who took the picture, but it's all three of us. And we're getting ready to head to West Point. We actually flew together, and Lynn had like a cousin that lived pretty close that picked us up and then got us there on our day. Dan had a second retirement. I think you and a bunch of our classmates went to his retirement in DC, and I, even though I lived close, I wasn't able to make it. But he had a second one, kind of in Medford, Oregon. He spent a lot of time in the National Guard, and a lot of folks, from the Happy Camp area showed up for that, which was really cool. But Lynn came from San Antonio, and so we reenacted that picture of the three of us getting ready to go off to West Point together. We even made sure we were on the right side. Lynn was in the middle.
Right, that's fantastic. I traveled back with Tom Monahan because he was from the Bay Area as well, and so we did the same thing where we kind of
we consider that Southern California there. So
yeah. So what was surprising about West Point, given the fact that you did, even though you just had a freshman experience as ROTC, what kind of shocked you when you got there? What was different?
Well, I think for me it was is probably the same thing that everybody else experienced. Just the even though there were folks that I talked to that could tell me about it, until you're actually undergoing that complete immersion at West Point, you're not ready for that, and I guess in the full sense of the word. So that's really what I experienced. I know I think we were in the same Beast Company, and I had the privilege of rooming right next to the company commander, Cadet Ortiz. And I just remember trying to, half an hour before taps, trying to get into my room so I could do whatever I needed to do. But Cadet Ortiz did not think I was moving, smartly enough. And so I kept going back and forth. And finally I got into my room, and I just remember laying in my bunk and thinking to myself, man, I could go take that ROTC scholarship they offered me at Oregon State. And Mom and Dad, I'm sure,
a lot farther from Cadet Ortiz. Cadet Ortiz had a lot of feedback to give, and that's what I apprecited about him. I didn't have a chance to tell him that at the time, but he had a lot of feedback for us.
He did give a lot of feedback, positive and otherwise. Yeah.
There you go. Seventh Company. Goodness gracious. That's fantastic. What and so F4, how did you find that when you transitioned over there?
Yeah, no, I think kind of a common theme I think that you're finding amongst all of us. Some companies tougher than others. This was probably middle of the road. We had a couple of cows that thought that they needed to change the world, one plebe at a time. I remember my roommate and I think his name was Mike Anderson. We drove by a cow's room on a Saturday afternoon, and we ended up reciting poop for a couple hours. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But the biggest impact I remember was during reorganization week. We were living in the divisions.
Yep.
And this yearling came to us and gathered up a bunch of us and said, "Hey, we got to move this huge wall locker from the 46th division over to the 6th floor of the 48th. Get to work on it, and don't worry about like cutting corners and all that." I mean, those things were heavy. So we're moving this wall locker, and it was like a major engineering moving operation, whatever. Well, halfway through it, I think my life flashed before my eyes. This guy comes running out, and I didn't know who he was at the time, but his name was Joe Basil. He was a senior, and we had two senior football players in our company. One was Darrell Williams, who became the Soup, and I don't remember him real well, but Joe came out, and he was a starting center. Now, imagine somebody that is straight out of a Sopranos episode from Brooklyn. Yeah. Italian, big, loud, and he's like, "What is going on here?" And so we had basically interrupted his nap between football practices.
Getting the yearling was nowhere to be found.
Camp. And so that was a near-death experience.
Right. The yearling that put you up to it was nowhere to be found. It was just a bunch of plebes with a locker, right?
Yeah. So anyway, we got the thing moved, and the yearling came out, and he took a 4C. I'm going to give you guys a good 4C. I'm like, "Well, thanks a lot, pal."
That really, boy, I'm going to put that one in the bank.
Yeah.
How'd you find academics?
I really struggled a lot. Plebe year particularly, and I got a little better throughout the time at West Point. So I did when I was at Oregon State, I took some chemistry and some calculus and those types of things, and they gave me credit for that. So my first year, I didn't have to take chemistry. So instead, they put me in I had to pick a language. Well. When I was at Happy Camp, I was dating a girl that was she was the exchange student at our high school, and she spoke Spanish. She was from a Spanish-speaking country, and so we were still. I wasn't quite yet a member of the proud 98% club at that point in time. So she talked me into taking Spanish at West Point, and I'd never taken any Spanish, never spoken a word of it. As opposed to most people who took it. And then besides being a plebe. So, long story short, I think I had the second lowest grade in Spanish as a plebe. I got a D the first semester. I think the person that was lower than me got an F. The only thing that saved me was we had to give like a 3 to 5 minute speech. And I went and I wrote out the speech in English. I had it translated, and I literally memorized it word for word, some of which I could probably sound off on right now. And I gave that. That's the only reason I got a really good grade on that. And that's the only reason I even passed. Second semester wasn't much better. English was horrible. That's when you realize you're in a different environment than, a civilian school. I was getting B's and so in English at OSU, but when I got to West Point, it was a totally different ball game.
The girlfriend is no longer around, but you remember that speech. You remember that? I said the Spanish-speaking girlfriend is part of history, but you can still recite that.
I can still recite the speech, and I can tell you about 3 things in Spanish. But anyway, I guess I'm a better person for it. And it was really stupid because now I never had any training in German, but I kind of grew up in obviously by my name, my family was German, and we spoke a lot of German. We spent a lot of time in Germany, so I can actually speak pretty decent German. But anyway. Such is life and the decisions that 18-year-olds make.
Right. To an 18-year-old, the obvious solutions are not so obvious.
Not at all. Not at all.
Oh, that's great. Now, high school, you said you and Dan played sports together. What were your sports of choice, and how did that translate to the academy?
Yeah, I was a horrible athlete then. Wasn't much better at the academy. The good thing is, I kind of grew up in outside of Portland, Oregon, and my first 10 years, I played a little bit of golf on the golf team. Was horrible at that. Played a little basketball. Was horrible at that. Would have never made any kind of big. I was on the varsity golf team, but I would have never made the football team or the basketball team. But you go to a high school in Happy Camp where there's about 10 to 12 people on the basketball team and 15 on the football team. You get a little bit of playing time that way. I will say Dan Hogeson's dad was nice enough to let me play basketball, but I was definitely 10th out of 10 on the depth chart there.
At least you knew what you were.
So how did you? I played no sports at the academy. I really enjoyed. The intramurals here and there. Played some football and basketball and swam a little bit. But
did you and Dan keep touch when you got there? Or
I'm sorry.
Did you keep touch with Dan when you got there?
Yeah, kind of a funny story. Personal story for him and I. So we had this great buddy who his name is Dr. Chuck Colas, MD, and he was a horrible student at Happy Camp. But somehow later in life he became a doctor. But anyway, his goal in life was to be a bull rider, a professional bull rider, and then be a professional rancher. And I don't know why it was, but he would write these. He would draw these little cartoons all the time of a bull's head. It'd take about 15 seconds. I could do it real quick right now. But that was just what Chuck did. That was like his signature. Well, Danny and I learned how to do it as well. Well, I don't know if you remember during Beast Barracks, but it seemed like every other day we were standing in line to get issued, something like our second pack of, briefs that we'd send to the laundry, and they'd end up, expanding out, 10 times too big. But after about 1 or 2 weeks of Beast Barracks, I got kind of brave, and I went and I found Dan's name. They'd have a list of, I don't know, you remember what I'm talking about? I mean, you'd have to sign for whatever the thing is. And they'd have a list of all 1,400 of us, and you find your name and you sign, initial off on it. Well, I got brave, so I signed my name, and then I went and found Dan's name, and I think he was like in second company or first company, so we never saw each other. And so I drew one of these little bulls next to his name, so he knew I was coming. So then, next time I went, he'd been there first, so we were like informally communicating during Beast.
I love that.
Now, I'll apologize for doing this, but fast forward about 35 years, I was with my family in downtown DC, and we were in a parade. I think it was a Veterans Day parade or something. And we're on one side of the street, and I see Dan, in his I think it was a 3-star at that point in time, across the street. And so I get my wife to give me a piece of paper and a pen, and I draw one of the bulls, and I hand it to my 6-year-old daughter. I say, go run over there and give this to the guy in the uniform over there. And we kind of hid from there, because really there was just Chuck, Dan, and I were the only ones that knew how to do that. So
that's fantastic. I love that. I talk about a little morale bump though. In Beast, you see a message from a buddy, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that's great. So now you shifted over to B1 as a yearling, right?
Sure.
We'll talk about going out to the ferocious end of the Corps. I mean, from F4, the 4th Reg, we all hung out and had picnics together, and then you were over there in B1. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we weren't plebes anymore, so I mean, obviously that part of it was behind us. But yeah, I mean, it was it was what it was. I mean, you're kind of in the situation, you just deal with it. As a yearling, the thing that I just hated and struggled with was really nothing to do where we were, but we basically were, we were CQs and, missing classes just, when you're struggling kind of academically, you're not doing that great, missing classes because you're on CQ, it seems like kind of a waste, but that was, that's kind of what my only gripe there. But yeah, I mean, I guess we every company had its traits, and we certainly had ours, but it was all good.
Yeah. Okay. Now you were located in which barracks? Right. You were
We
over
were
in
in
the
Lee Barracks,
Lee
so
Barracks.
right across from Mahan Hall there. Yeah,
Okay.
basically that's kind of Alpha Company. If our A1 was over in Pershing, and B and C were in Lee Barracks, and then the rest of a lot of the rest of First Regiment was over in Sherman.
Okay. And then what? So intramurals was your stock and trade. What'd you get into there in B1?
Yeah. So my first experience there was just with the football. We had some seniors that were really good football players that played intramurals. We won the brigade championship there. I can't say I had anything to do with it. In fact, the like fourth or fifth game, like many people, I broke my wrist, and everybody else has other injuries, and generally unsupervised football. And actually, it was kind of good. I got out of a lot of parades because I had a broken arm. And at least it was my left arm, and I'm right-handed. So I definitely remember watching everybody going out for parade practice while I was actually doing something productive.
Now you're Howisher says you were on the class committee starting yearly years. Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, I think we all voted for a class committee rep somewhere. I think starting in our sophomore year. You had your honor rep and then the class committee rep, and so I represented our company those last 3 years.
So basically, all the stuff that we put together around the class, the Constitution, all that, you all kind of worked on that together, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, we're reaping the benefits all these years later for your good work. So thank you for your service. How about that? What was your course of study?
I was a civil engineering major. So, yep.
I seem to remember being in classes with you. For some reason, we were like tracking on chemistry or something because I remembered you from fourth reg, and I remembered you after plebe year. But anyway, so somehow we crossed. I was in mechanical engineering, so somehow we crossed paths.
Yeah, probably
physics.
Yeah, a lot of common courses. Statics and dynamics, thermodynamics, things like that. And
it sounds like where you call yourself on the bell curve of academic achievement, we were probably in similar sections. Hey brother, don't copy my homework. Get someone else's.
Yeah, we always joke that like in electrical engineering, in those courses we had to take everybody had to write their honor statement or whatever we called it on the homework, and they probably all went back to guys like Tim Knight or somebody that really knew what the heck they were doing.
Jim Crawford,
Larry Oliver was the guy that usually had his name attached to many honor statements.
I think we had Jim Crawford in our company, who was an incredibly smart guy. So I think he was on more acknowledgement statements than anybody. There'd be a line inside his room.
Sure.
If we could just wake him up. But anyway, so civil engineering, a little bit of Spanish. Did you stick in Spanish the whole time? How'd that go?
No. That was just the absolute minimum that we all had to take. I think was. I don't know if you could get out of taking a foreign language, but as soon as I fulfilled that minimal requirement, that was.
Yeah, I think I did the same. I popped out of that as quickly as I could. And then coming up to branch selection, so you went engineers after all.
Yep.
Talk about that. What drew that to you? Or
I mean, a lot of folks, they seemed like they picked a branch, the day they got there. I actually landed on post thinking I was going to be an engineer. I went through TCAT and like, oh, this armor is pretty cool. Let's do that. And then, kind of running around with the new cadets, maybe infantry is for me. Then, by the time it came time to pick it, it was engineers. The sappers, we like to say we're just infantrymen with a demo bag. And also, it's kind of the best of both worlds. The great thing that kind of sold me on engineers is that you really do, particularly after you've been a company commander, you start getting more opportunities to really use your degree when you do that. So, I mean, that was appealing to me as well.
Okay. And then what did you do before we talk about your where you ended up getting stationed? How'd you entertain yourself as an upperclassman? I think we all had our ways of escaping some of the grind a bit. What was your preferred entertainments? What would you
Yeah, no,
do for fun?
I can't say that there was anything specific that I did to entertain myself. I mean, I really was. I mean, the way I remember it anyway was that I was either trying to catch up on sleep, trying to do whatever I could to try to do better on PT tests, and certainly trying to do better academically. Moving forward. I do remember one really fun incident when I was a yearling. The firsties had this great idea to hydroplane, but not like out in the area like normal folks would. But we flooded the top floor or sixth floor of Lee Barracks.
Yeah.
And the plebes were in charge of taking their towels and kind of keeping the ramp dry. So you have this ramp, this area where you you'd be in your flip flops and you'd run, and then you hit the water, and it was a big contest to see who could get the furthest. So that all worked out really well, and it was a lot of fun until somebody yelled up, "Hey, the OC's in the building!" And so everybody just ran out there, particularly plebes with towels, tried to clean everything up, and water was going down the elevator shaft and everything. I don't know if anybody got in trouble, but that was, for me, that was entertainment.
I remember those. Well, MacArthur Barracks also had the long hallways that allowed for some of that nonsense, right?
Sure.
I never had the courage to do it. I would cheer mightily for others.
Okay, good for you. Good job.
So post-selection, how'd that go for you? I know engineers is a more competitive branch. How did it go for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was, I was high enough in the class that I kind of got what I wanted. I really kind of wanted to go to Germany. A lot of the kind of Cullum assignments in Germany were off the table by the time I got to pick, but ended up in the 7th Engineer Brigade, part of 7th Corps. And it was a great assignment. All the really smart people like, Al Beninati and Rick Higley and Randy Birchfield, they ended up taking the Hawaii slots. And I think Tim Knight took the Bragg slot, or there were more than that. But those were long gone by the time they asked me to stand up and pick what I was doing.
Right. Now, everyone who was stationed in Germany always talks about where they were. So where were you located with the 7th?
I was stationed in Aschaffenburg, which was just outside of Frankfurt. So a lot of folks, a lot of classmates. It was actually a 3rd Infantry Division, 3rd Brigade, 3rd ID community. Had some classmates from that organization running around there, and also a lot of great stuff.
What kind of roles did you have as an engineer?
Yeah, so it was kind of a typical time. I spent a little over a year as a platoon leader, a year and a half as a platoon leader, about a year or so as a company executive officer, and then I had the privilege of being the battalion S1 until I left there. But we had a great group of guys. Kevin Lauderyoung was my roommate there, another single lieutenant that we used to try to blow off a lot of steam when we weren't at work. Don Johannes, Ed Columbus, and probably a couple other folks.
Now, did you live on the economy, or were you on
absolutely. Yeah, it was great. Like I said, Kevin and I, we had an apartment off post. We had this local guest house called the Zoom Angle with an old man named Garrett that ran it, and his wife, made the pizzas, and we got to be good friends with him. And we try to go down there quite a bit. And, we bring folks in and just have a great time.
Now, how about field time? Were you out in the field a lot?
Yeah, it was. It seemed like especially the first year, it just seemed like it was nonstop. We had if we weren't preparing for a big RCHEP, we were usually in the field preparing, or doing something, and IG inspections. It was a work hard, play hard type of situation in Germany. We certainly certainly got through it, certainly learned a lot, and it was great. One of the favorite things that happened was, we were out in the field, but our company was chosen to be and I don't remember if it was the 87 or the 88 reforger exercise, but we were scheduled to be referees for a sister unit. So I think it was the 54th Engineers out of Vielflichten. And so we went to this big, long, a couple of weeks, we went to this British post up north. The reforger was up north. And we went through preparation and did everything we had. And then we got to actually the point where we were supposed to link up with the unit that we were going to referee for. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that they didn't bring their alpha company with them. So there's, about 3 or 4 of us lieutenants and 3 or 4 NCOs and all our drivers. We literally had nothing to do because there was no unit there. And we had I think our battalion S3 was in charge. And I went to him and I said, well, sir, there's a railhead here that really needs a thorough inspection because I think the unit's going to be leaving from there. And it'd be good if I took everybody there with me to inspect the place, and I'll report back to you about what it's like. Well, the reality of it is that my German aunt and uncle and all my cousins lived right in the middle of the maneuver box.
Happened to be near the railhead.
So, they were close to the railhead, but so we all got in a Jeep, and it took us a couple hours to get there, but we basically ended up spending a bunch of time with my relatives.
Doing a real good inspection.
Yeah, we did a really good inspection. Now, the real problem was that my uncle in his basement had this great, German, Bavarian themed bar, and it was well stocked, and we weren't allowed to partake in it. So that was, that was a lot of self-discipline there.
Well, there you go. And then how did it end up? What was your progress there? How many years there? And then what was your next move?
Well, just a standard 3-year tour.
Okay.
One of the good things about branching engineers was when we all first were commissioned, the home of the engineers was at Fort Belvoir.
Right. And
what a great place to be a new lieutenant. Georgetown and the fun life was very, very accessible. Well, while we were all in Germany, they moved the engineer school from Fort Belvoir to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Now, this was back. Now, you go out to Fort Leonard Wood today, and you'll still think it's Fort Lost in the Woods. But, back then, when they just moved it, and we were the first advanced course that ended up at Leonard Wood, it was like, the trip to Walmart on Friday afternoon. That was kind of the big social event there. Now, we did get pretty good at hanging out at places like Lake of the Ozarks on the weekends and St. Louis.
You're not the first guest on the podcast who's mentioned the move to Fort Leonard Wood as being somewhat of a downgrade.
Yeah. I think I don't remember who it was that mentioned it, but it was a true story that, and I know John Corsi. He was in C1, but he was an engineer, and he went to Korea, and he was promised to go anywhere after that. Well, it turned out you were promised to go anywhere you want as long as it's Fort Leonard Wood afterwards. And also,
God bless the Army.
This is what
God
it is.
Bless the Army. And so, how did it progress from there? How long did you stay in?
30 years and 3 days.
Really? So talk us through the next steps.
So after the advanced course, I reported to the 25th Infantry Division. I joined an engineer battalion there. What was interesting was, our 3 classmates that I mentioned before, Al Beninati, Rick Higley, and Randy Birchfield, they actually went there first, and they were on a 4-year assignment. For some reason, most of us were on 3 years, but I think it was Alaska and Hawaii were on 4 years.
Okay.
So actually, I linked up with those guys, and
that's great.
obviously they're doing great things there. So I spent about 3 years there. In kind of in the middle of that, I was deployed with another classmate of mine from the battalion, Kurt Benson. During Operation Desert Storm, we were snagged out of the great state of Hawaii and the beaches, and sent kind of in that replacement stream through to Iraq, to Saudi Arabia, and then we were
It's
assigned.
so interesting.
And, we're waiting for the big breaching operation and for all the company commanders there to need to be replaced. And that obviously, thankfully, never happened. We all got jobs and spent a few months in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq, but eventually we made it back.
What's interesting is that the one branch that kind of just set up a pool of replacement officers was the engineers. If you think about how dark that is in terms of a personnel decision, right? Because the other branch, nobody that we've talked to is like a bunch of armor officers sitting around or whatever. It's the engineers. They create a little pool of officers.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and this is it was kind of we all kind of look at it now and it's like everything went really well, but certainly leading up to that point in time, nobody knew how this was going to turn out, and certainly when Army units would try to breach minefields and they played fair and everything at places like NTC. It was ugly. And I'm not an expert at what's going on in Ukraine right now, but certainly when the Ukrainians, tried to move and retake a whole bunch of area, they didn't have the breaching capability that they needed. Yeah. From what I could see, and certainly no closed source information I have, but certainly the fact that the Russians were given 6 months and had covering fires to help prevent them from moving forward.
Right. Was something we had no idea going over there. I remember a briefing, and I've said this on the podcast before, where they basically said 1 in 3 of you is probably going to get, injured or hurt or killed in some, in some fashion. So that was our expectation, was not nearly what it became.
Sure. Certainly both wars in Iraq, we really had no idea what was going to happen with the chemical weapons and things of that nature. We look back and okay, what's the big deal? But man, those were real things that guys went through.
So what did you end up doing when you're over there? Obviously the operation took place and you didn't need to, backfill any company.
Yeah. So
what did you end up doing?
There were a pile of us officers that were kind of stacked up there. They made me, what was my position? I was the assistant S4 for the 20th Engineer Brigade. And they put me specifically in charge of trying to move and coordinate heavy equipment across the battlefield, and then particularly in the retrograde coming back, because I got there kind of right around the first of the year. Yeah. Obviously the engineers, we have a lot of big equipment, bulldozers, things like that, and it's you're supposed to be able to organically move stuff, but we depended on core level assets for a lot of that. So I got to coordinate that. It's always a good learning experience. It wasn't the toughest job for the most important, but it was what it was.
And then from that, did you go back to Hawaii or?
Then back to Hawaii, did that little, back then we had this thing called CAS-Cubed at Leonard Wood, spent a couple months there, and then went into company command in Hawaii, and obviously had a great experience there.
Yeah. Now, Hawaii, a light division. What was life like as an engineer for a light division? Was that you as an instrument sapper bag?
We had like I wouldn't call him a crazy colonel, but he was a great battalion commander. But he loved to run and he loved to road march, it seemed. And I'm not talking with vehicles. I'm talking with put stuff on your back. And so we seemed like we did a lot of that. We did a lot of good training. The vast majority of our training was with our infantry. Brigades and battalions and things of that nature. And we were actually a very, very small unit. So, we were a few engineers trying to support, obviously, a big organization. Mm-hmm. So that was, it was hard. I didn't spend a lot of time there, but certainly, Kurt Benson and a few other my buddies that were company commanders with me spent a lot of time at JRTC and a few other places supporting being part of a combined arms task force.
Now, how about family? When did that get off the ground?
I'm a very late bloomer when it comes to school and a lot of other things. I flash forward about 20 years from there. I met my wife in the immigration line in Beijing, China in 2020. 2000 and 2001. Oh, no, 2002, Thanksgiving weekend. So I actually was in stationed in Korea at the time. I was I was in the CFC USFK plans shop, and actually a classmate of ours by the name of Dave Funk, great American, him and his wife, they were over there on a company tour. I was on another company, so I only had to be there a year. But one of the company commanders that I'd served with in Hawaii, we just ended up kind of being on the same staff, and so we took a 4-day tour with a visa to go to Beijing, and we were in line to get through passport / visa control for about 2 hours, and I met this young lady, and so we just started talking and really getting along. Now, where Dave and Nellie Funk really helped me out there was this tradition that all the wives there in Korea, they put together this shopping guide to Beijing. So, back then at least, if you went to Beijing and you wanted to buy pearls, man, you could get them for a steal. Or if you wanted to get North Face jackets or just all this stuff, you could get. Now, some of it was real, some of it wasn't. But they wrote this great shopping guide of where to go, what to pay, who to see, etc. And I had that, and we're sitting there going through it. This buddy of mine, his name was Rick Berriman, and so she notices that. We started talking about it, and she almost thought I liked shopping, which there's nothing.
We just got to take a moment to just acknowledge.
Yeah, it was a moment of weakness. But anyway, so we got this great conversation. Yeah. Well, so we all get through, and I was really enjoying my time with Melissa, and so we get through customs, and it turns out that she got on one of the tour buses to go to one hotel, and Rick and I got on the other one to go to the other. And it was just the weirdest thing. The lady that was running the tour, she got on the bus and she came in and she looked at me and my buddy. She said, "Hey, we got too many people in this bus and at that hotel. Do you two mind going on the other bus?" And I'm like, so anyway, so I spent 4 days shopping, 4 days hanging out. Next thing you know, I fly to Dallas, Texas for New Year's Eve. Then we meet in Hawaii for vacation 3 or 4 months later. And next thing you know, I've got 2 kids that I'm trying to corral, and I'm still trying to corral.
But you work the immigration line in Beijing.
The immigration line in Beijing, If you're looking for love, that's where you find it.
That's a first for this podcast. You work the immigration line.
I dare anybody to replicate it, although I'm sure there's even better stories out there.
Now, what was her story? Where was she coming from?
Great question. And I just admire the heck. I mean, I love her as my wife, but I just admire the heck out of Melissa. So she was a lawyer in Dallas, Texas. And this kind of comes back to, pursue your passions, not your, not money. But she graduated from law school at SMU, and she immediately went to work for one of these big law firms that offered a whole bunch of money. And quite frankly, at least the story as I relate it is she wasn't real happy about that. And she had done some pro bono work for some soldiers down at Fort Hood. And so she got to know some folks, and they're like, "Hey, why don't you try to be a member of the JAG Corps?" And so I like to say I recruited her for the Army, but she had actually already submitted her application for the JAG Corps. And, and so obviously that was a great conversation piece. About 6 or 8 months later, she was accepted in the JAG Corps, went to their version of basic training and basic. And then the one thing I did do is I did talk her in, because by then I had my follow-on assignment for Fort Leonard Wood, and I talked her into going to Fort Leonard Wood, which I still owe her.
So what was her rank at the end of that? What was she, a captain?
So she started off as a first lieutenant, and then they very quickly promoted to captain. I always gave her, because now she's a direct commissionee, and she received nothing, as far as financial compensation for joining the Army. She basically just joined the Army as a lawyer, and she became a captain. But I always gave her a hard time and told her, she's going through her, awkward lieutenant years as a captain. That's a pretty good financial deal there.
And what rank were you when you got married?
Oh, I was a major when we met, and then about 8 months later, I was a lieutenant colonel.
Good for you. All right. And what brought you back to Leonard Wood?
She's exactly like within 1 day of being 10 years younger than me. So
immigration line worked out for you.
The immigration line worked out.
What took you back to Leonard Wood for that first assignment with her?
So that was Battalion Command, and absolutely wonderful assignment. I actually I left Korea and Dave and the shopping in China behind, and I spent a year in kind of in a pre-pod position as the chief of doctrine, and then went into Battalion Command. Obviously it was a great opportunity. I was a basic training company commander. There's two types of basic training. For those of you that got grandkids or kids that are getting ready to go into the Army, enlist, their first assignment, their first training, they go to one of two routes. They either go, in general, they go to basic training followed by their AIT, and those are usually advanced individual training. Those are usually the low density things. So if you're going to be, maybe a combat medic or a cartographer or some medical thing, you're going to go someplace like Fort Jackson or Fort Leonard Wood or a couple of Fort Benning, and you're going to go through 9 weeks of basic training, and then you're going to go someplace else for your AIT, where you actually learn your skill, your MOS. Some of the high density MOSs, obviously infantrymen, field artillerymen, combat engineers have what's called one station unit training. So 14 weeks, you go through your basic training. You have a little ceremony to signify that you've gone on at AIT, but you've got the same drill sergeants, and it's basically one graduation at the end. And so, my counterpart had all the low density engineers. I had the high density, the combat engineers and the bridge crewmen. And,
Got it.
Just a wonderful opportunity to have an impact on. Now, granted, drill sergeants who are amazing people across the board, do all the hard lifting of turning, young folks with a lot of them with a lot of issues into soldiers serving their country. But to be able to be part of that on such a regular basis is really a great time.
And now that took you out through 20, I imagine, or
I left command in 2006. Okay. And Melissa and I actually, we technically dated throughout the 3 years at Leonard Wood, and then right before we PCS'd out of there, we actually got married at Fort Leonard Wood.
Okay.
Yep.
And so how did you path for the next 10 years then?
Melissa and I had a joke. We both wanted to deploy. We felt like it was our turn. So she, after we got married, she went to Korea for a little while, and then she got assigned on a tasker, and the term YS taskers come up in these podcasts, back to the Middle East. So she was a trial defense attorney between Iraq, Kuwait, and Afghanistan. Oh, wow. I went immediately to Iraq, where I was the G3 for the Gulf Region Division. So that was a Corps of Engineers district, a division with 3 districts, and we were really in charge of trying to facilitate the reconstruction of Iraq. We had gotten to the point where Congress had allocated billions, and working with the State Department, we tried to do that.
Trying to get things back.
Melissa and I, we would see each other once in a while. The closest I've ever came to death was we went on our first anniversary. We went to R&R down in Qatar, and they had all these field trips, and they took us out on this boat, and from the boat we got on this inflatable hot dog, and the guy with the jet ski would pull us along. And the dude was going way too fast, and she was in front of me, and I don't know exactly what happened, but I think she flew off the inflatable hot dog that was going about 40 miles an hour, hit me in the head, or maybe I think her ribs may have hit me in the head, knocked me out. If I hadn't had a life vest on, I would have died. I would have drowned easily. That's good advertisement for wearing your life vest. She didn't even notice the fact that she had broken 3 or 4 ribs.
Really?
All I know is they got me back on the boat. I came to, a bunch of salt water came out, kind of gross. And then they took me to a Kuwaiti hospital, had the MRI. And then I woke up the next morning, and there was this, what turned out to be a nurse and she was in a full black burqa, and she was looking over me, checking me out, and I thought to myself, my God, I hope I haven't been praying to the wrong God all these years. But anyway. So anyway, that was a year there. Then let's see. After that, let's see, where did we go? We came back to the Washington, D.C. area. We went to the Washington, D.C. area. I was stationed in the Pentagon, and she was stationed with a legal organization. Great experience getting to know how the Pentagon works. From there, I took brigade level command, Corps of Engineers district up in Alaska. So we went there for 3 years. Wonderful time. Probably could talk 2 or 3 podcasts from that. And then came back to the Pentagon, where I served as an XO to one of the civilian political appointees for 4 years before I retired.
What a run. And what, you were a colonel when you retired?
Yeah.
What a run. Good for you. What, and so you decided to stay in the area because you're in Virginia now.
Yeah. So, so second career, I spent about 8 months finding myself in 2016 after, I and a whole bunch of other kind of classmates kind of retired. I spent a little bit of time working for the Missile Defense Agency at Fort Belvoir. We were still living there. And then from there, I applied for and was accepted into the senior executive service with the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah.
I actually, my boss, well, not right away, but, about 3 years into that, a classmate of ours, Scott Spellman, was my senior rater. But I took a position up in New York City. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Corps of Engineers part of it, but obviously Scott, the chief of engineers, is the guy in charge, the commanding general. He's got 9 geographic divisions. They're authorized 2-star generals, each of them. Usually have a 1-star and sometimes a 2-star commanding them. And then underneath them, that 2-star has 2 SESs, kind of like in a maneuver division, you've got a 2-star and then you've got 2 1-stars. And so I started off as what we called the director of resource management, and then became the director of program management before I retired a second time about 7 months ago.
7 months ago for a second retirement.
Second retirement. And so
That's a great run.
Like I said, I'm really slow. We've got a 15-year-old daughter, which, she is an incredible blessing because she's very headstrong, and she lets me know on a daily basis how dumb I really, truly am. I mean, just, she doesn't even have to look at my transcript for West Point.
Remind us of that.
That's kind of the way that goes. And then I've got an 11-year-old son as well. I really struggled, Paul, with whether or not what to do. I felt like, I'd kind of done what I wanted in the Corps, and wasn't really willing to move from there. And it was kind of that COVID time period. You were kind of looking for what are we going to make of this? And I felt like I had maybe 5 or 10 more years in the tank. But I said, well, I'm watching an awful lot of my son's baseball games on Game Changer in Europe. Maybe I want to be there for him from now on, and so that's kind of what led to that decision. So I'm enjoying
in the long view of it. That's a good decision.
Yeah, hopefully, I think so.
But 7 months, there's about a year after you fully retire that is an odd period. So you're still kind of going through that deconditioning, right?
Yeah,
having gone through that myself. So. And what are you oriented on now in terms of, certainly your son's baseball games would be one thing. Your daughter's continuously reminding you of your deficiencies would be another. What other things keep you busy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm amazed at how my days are filled between, getting the kids up in the morning, trying to get the house squared away, get the shopping done, getting the grass mowed, and then, being ready for the baseball game like last night and all that. I keep bragging about my wife. She's great. She doesn't care about fancy clothes or jewelry or any of those things, but she loves to travel. So, Well, we just got done with our big European vacation, and now we got to go to Japan, first thing in the summer, and so just planning that and making that productive. It just seems like every day is adequately filled, and certainly the blessings of the kids and the family and the things that are going on in the DC area.
It's impossible to describe the time dilation goes in when you leave commercial work. I remember days where I was in meetings from 8 in the morning until 7 at night, all that kind of stuff. And the other day, my wife was on the road and she asked me, "What did you do today?" I said, "Well, I changed the batteries in the smoke detectors." And that was it. But it took all day. I don't know where.
Quite frankly, when we get off this podcast, I have to go wash the windows, finish washing the windows. So,
and that's going to be your accomplishment for the day.
Well, I'll be on my support form.
That's fantastic. What a run. So if you were to go back in your whole career or life, what advice would you give yourself, and what would be going on in the period in which you gave it?
Yeah, no, great question. I know you've asked other people that, and so I try to think of something intelligent to tell everybody. But failing that, I think it came out in one of your other podcasts about the idea of an extrovert versus an introvert, and I never really gave it much thought, but I figured out, and not really that long ago, that ultimately at the end of the day, I am an introvert. And what people have to remember is that introvert extrovert isn't about, being able to give speeches and, being friendly and all that stuff. It's more about where you get your energy from. And, your extroverts get their energy from interacting with people, and extroverts get it from having quiet time with their family and all those types of things. When I was the director of program management up in New York and Brooklyn, my boss and we had a leadership development team for, kind of the GS 13, 14s. And we always assigned a book. And one year my boss signed this book. It's called Quiet. And it's about being an extrovert. And it's good for, or it's about being an introvert, but it's really good for extroverts too, because all of us in all organizations, we're leading introverts as much as we're leading extroverts, likely. And the problem with introverts is that you're sitting in a staff meeting and you have 10 or 15 people in there, and it's particularly for some reason a lot of engineers are introverts. They tend to keep things inside, and a lot of times as leaders, the answers that we need as leaders in our organization, somebody has them. They're just not used to sharing them or not willing to share them.
Yeah, right.
So I read that book and kind of just fully understanding, one, that on the scale of being an introvert, I'm not a real big introvert, but when I go to a conference and you're out on the floor and you're interacting with people all day, I probably am not one of the people that's going to want to go out to dinner and a bunch of drinks afterwards. I'm probably going to want to go back and read and catch up on things and call my wife and all those types of things. Some people love, just do that. But anyway, fully understanding that earlier, I think would be helpful for me, but really for anybody that's leading folks to understand that difference in how people are moving. Now, there's a ton of other things that you need to know to be an effective leader. And
I think those are such wise words, because you can alter your leadership style based on your own energy levels.
Absolutely.
I think that's great. I actually was the reverse. I always thought I was an introvert just because I was very careful and conservative in my risk taking.
That's interesting.
Actually, I'm an extreme extrovert. So I should have not studied anything, just walked around all day and talked.
Yeah.
Which is where I ended up.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Is there any story that we haven't covered? I know that I always like to check in on that, because occasionally we have an extra story or two.
I think, certainly we could spend several hours just telling stories, and certainly that's why we have
trip to Alaska.
Mark Wolf, our classmate here in the DC area, does a great job getting together. I haven't been with the group in a little while. I need to do that, but you can spend hours
Oh,
and
yeah, I'll
hours.
trip up there myself. I went through briefly, but there's a whole bunch of great friends up there I need to come up there and see.
Yeah. Well,
Rhino, what a pleasure talking to you today.
I was going to mention one thing, Paul, and that's if you've never done this, I know a couple of classmates of mine have done this. Now, when I was with the Corps of Engineers, I actually part of our terrain that we were responsible for construction was at West Point. So it was a wonderful experience because when you're a cadet, you're kind of in this bubble. When we were doing construction there across the board, you're kind of on the outside looking in, and you could really appreciate where you were. But one of the things I took the time to do is if you go by the registrar's office, and I don't know if you can do this by phone or by mail, but you can request your cadet file. And so I did that. Now, what I was hoping for was when I was applying to West Point, I had like 3 or 4 recommendations. One was an old boss. One was the head of like intramurals at Oregon State, and then one was I can't remember what. So I was hoping to see those in there, but they send you a file, and it's almost like a freedom of information. Everything they have on you, it's got a whole bunch. Mine had a whole bunch of counseling statements from my tactical officer, both when I was a plebe and later years. Some of them were not particularly flattering about my ability as a cadet and my future as an Army officer, but
don't let your daughter see them.
Well, that I would never. Yeah, that would give her too much ammunition. But if you've never done that, and know that opportunity, there's some gems in there that take you down memory road.
I'm going to do that. That's great advice.
Give it a shot. If anybody needs help trying to get a hold of the right folks to do that, I can probably try that.
That's very good. That's great advice. It would certainly, at the very least, it would trigger some memories, some positive memories about the experience, if that's possible.
Sure. In
the rearview mirror, those counseling statements always look a little more wise. Yeah. Anyway, good advice, Rhino. So much fun. I'm so glad we reconnected.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And I think I told you this in our email exchange that I took. I think it's George Bond's advice, and I listened to the podcast while I'm out power walking, and it's just before you know it, your daily routine of exercise is over with. It's just great catching up with everybody. You get these little snippets. I think it was Jack Callahan, talked a little bit about Air Assault School. And I'm like, hey man, I was there with Jack Callahan.
I was there with them, yeah.
At Air Assault, just little stuff like that. It's so much fun.
I edit these programs while doing a Peloton. And so I actually will attribute a lot of my physical stamina to classmates. So
okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much.
Take care, Paul. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.